The letter arrived on a December morning when frost painted the windows of Thornbury Hall in delicate crystalline patterns. Lady Beatrice Ashford stood in the morning room, her hands trembling as she read the words that would destroy what remained of her life. My dearest niece, it is with profound regret that I must inform you that your uncle, Lord Ashford, passed away 3 nights ago. The estate, as you know, was entailed away from the female line. His cousin, Mr. Gerald Ashford, has inherited everything. He has made it quite clear that you are no longer welcome at Thornbury Hall. You have until the end of January to vacate the premises. I wish I could offer you shelter, but my own circumstances do not permit it. Perhaps you might seek employment as a governess or companion. Your affectionate aunt, Cordelia. The paper slipped from Beatrice's fingers and drifted to the floor like a falling leaf. Governess, companion, charity case. At 24, she had become precisely what every unmarried gentlewoman feared most. Homeless, penniless, and entirely without protection. But what her aunt didn't know, what no one knew, was that Gerald Ashford had already made his intentions abundantly clear during his first visit to Thornbury Hall 3 days prior. You're a pretty thing, he had said, backing her into the library with whiskey on his breath and cruelty in his eyes. No family, no prospects, nowhere to go. You'll be grateful for my generosity, won't you? She had escaped that time barely. The housekeeper's timely interruption had saved her. But Gerald would return. And next time there would be no interruption. Beatrice looked out the window at the December landscape, at the bare trees and iron-gray sky. Winter was coming, and she had nowhere to run. Except, she crossed to the escritoire and pulled out a sheet of paper, her hand steady now with desperate determination. There was one option, one impossible, audacious, potentially disastrous option. She began to write. Your Grace, you do not know me, but I am writing to propose a business arrangement that may prove mutually beneficial. Greystone Abbey, Derbyshire, same morning. Alexander Thorne, 7th Duke of Greystone, stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, staring out at his vast estate without truly seeing it. In his hand, he held a document that represented everything he despised: manipulation, obligation, and the suffocating weight of duty. You cannot be serious about this, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. His grandmother, the Dowager Duchess Marguerite, sat ramrod straight in a leather chair, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her expression implacable. At 73, she remained the most formidable woman he had ever known. I am entirely serious, Alexander. The entailment is clear. If you do not produce an heir by your 35th birthday, the dukedom passes to your cousin Reginald. Reginald is a dissolute fool who's gambled away 3 fortunes and sired God knows how many bastards across England. Nevertheless, he is next in line. The law is quite specific. Marguerite folded her hands in her lap. You have 4 months, Alexander. 4 months to marry and get your wife with child, or everything your family has built for 3 centuries will fall into Reginald's worthless hands. Alexander turned from the window, his jaw tight. At 34, he was tall and lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead when he forgot to brush it back, and gray eyes that could freeze a man at 20 paces. He had inherited his title at 21 when his father died suddenly, and he had spent the last 13 years taking his responsibilities with deadly seriousness. But this, you're asking me to marry a complete stranger and produce an heir like I'm breeding horses. I'm asking you to do your duty, Marguerite said sharply. Your father did his duty. His father before him did his duty. Now it falls to you. And if I refuse, then you condemn hundreds of tenant families to Reginald's mismanagement. You destroy the charitable foundations your mother established. You dishonor 3 centuries of Thorne family stewardship. She paused, letting the words sink in. Is your pride worth that much, Alexander? He wanted to rage at her. He wanted to throw the document into the fire and ride away from Greystone Abbey and never return. But he couldn't, because everything she said was true. I will not marry some simpering debutante who wants a title and my fortune, he said finally. If I must do this, it will be on my terms. A business arrangement. Clear expectations. No romantic delusions. Agreed, Marguerite said immediately. Too soon. As it happens, I may have a solution. Alexander's eyes narrowed. What have you done? Nothing yet, but I've had correspondence from several suitable candidates. Women of good breeding who understand the practical nature of such an arrangement. She produced a small stack of letters from her reticule. I've taken the liberty of vetting them. Any would make an acceptable duchess. He wanted to refuse, wanted to tell her to burn the letters and leave him alone. But the clock was ticking. For months until his 35th birthday. For months to save everything. Give them to me, he said roughly. He spent the next hour reading letters from women who were, as his grandmother promised, eminently suitable. Daughters of minor nobility fell on hard times. Widows seeking security. Women who understood this would be a transaction, nothing more. None of them stirred even the faintest interest. He was about to set the last letter aside when something in the handwriting caught his attention. It was elegant but simple, without the elaborate flourishes the other letters had employed. He began to read. Your Grace, you do not know me, but I am writing to propose a business arrangement that may prove mutually beneficial. I understand from society reports that you are in need of a wife and heir. I am in need of protection and a home. I am 24 years old, of respectable birth and breeding, in good health, and entirely clear-eyed about what such an arrangement would entail. I ask for no affection, no romance, no pretense of love. I require only safety and security. In exchange, I will provide you with an heir and fulfill all the duties expected of a duchess with competence and discretion. If this proposal interests you, please send word to Miss Beatrice Ashford, Thornbury Hall, Yorkshire. I remain, respectfully yours, Beatrice Ashford. Alexander read the letter 3 times. There was something in the stark honesty of it that appealed to him. No flowery language, no false modesty, just a clear statement of need and offer. I require only safety and security. Those words nagged at him. They suggested something more than mere financial difficulty. This one, he said, holding up the letter. Tell me what you know about her. Marguerite's expression revealed nothing. Lady Beatrice Ashford, daughter of the late Viscount Ashford, who died when she was 15. Her mother passed away when she was a child. She's been living with her uncle, Lord Ashford of Thornbury. He died recently, and the estate has passed to a cousin. From what I understand, her situation is precarious. Precarious how? She has no income, no family willing to take her in, and nowhere to go. The new heir has taken possession of Thornbury Hall. She must vacate by the end of January. Marguerite paused. I believe she is desperate, Alexander, which makes her ideal for your purposes. Ideal because she's desperate? Ideal because she will be grateful. She will not make demands. She will not harbor romantic expectations that can never be fulfilled. His grandmother's voice softened slightly. You need an heir, Alexander. She needs protection. It's a fair exchange. Alexander stared at the letter, at the neat, precise handwriting. I require only safety and security. What was she running from? Arrange a meeting, he said abruptly. Here, as soon as possible. I want to meet her before making any decisions. Very wise. I'll send a carriage for her tomorrow. She can arrive by week's weekend. After his grandmother left, Alexander stood alone in his study, holding the letter. He told himself this was practical, necessary, the only logical solution to an impossible situation. He told himself he felt nothing but resignation. But somewhere deep in his chest, something stirred. Curiosity, perhaps, or anticipation. He shook his head sharply. This was a business arrangement. Nothing more. He would meet Miss Beatrice Ashford. He would determine if she was suitable. If so, they would marry quickly and efficiently, produce an heir, and live separate lives under the same roof. Simple, practical, emotionless. Everything a duke could ask for. Greystone Abbey 5 days later. The carriage journey from Yorkshire to Derbyshire took 3 days in good weather. In December, With snow threatening and roads half frozen, it took 5. Beatrice arrived at Greystone Abbey just after dusk, exhausted, cold, and trying desperately not to show either. The Dowager Duchess's carriage was magnificent, far finer than anything she'd traveled in before, but 3 days of being jostled over rough roads had left her back aching and her nerves frayed. As the carriage swept through the gates and up the long drive, Beatrice caught her first glimpse of Greystone Abbey. It was enormous. Medieval stone walls rose against the darkening sky, towers and battlements that spoke of centuries of power and wealth. Lights blazed in dozens of windows, warm and golden against the December cold. It was beautiful, imposing, utterly intimidating, and it might, if she succeeded in the next few hours, become her home. The carriage stopped before the main entrance. A footman opened the door and helped her down with practiced efficiency. Beatrice smoothed her traveling dress, her best, though it was 3 years old and had been turned twice, and lifted her chin. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times during the journey. She would be calm, composed, practical. She would make it clear she understood exactly what this arrangement entailed. She would prove herself suitable. The massive front doors opened, and a distinguished butler appeared. "Miss Ashford, welcome to Greystone Abbey. I am Thornton. His Grace is expecting you in the library. Please, follow me." Beatrice stepped into an entrance hall that took her breath away. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, a grand staircase that curved upward like something from a dream. Portraits lined the walls, generations of thorns staring down with varying degrees of severity. This was a mistake. She didn't belong here. She was an impoverished nobody, pretending she could become a duchess. But then she thought of Gerald Ashford's hands reaching for her, his breath hot on her neck, and her resolve hardened. She would make this work. She had no choice. Thornton led her through corridors that seemed to go on forever, finally stopping before a set of double doors. "The Duke will join you shortly," he said, opening the doors to reveal a library that was easily 3 times the size of the one at Thornbury Hall. Books lined every wall, floor to ceiling. A fire crackled in an enormous hearth. Deep leather chairs were positioned near the windows, and a massive desk dominated one end of the room. Beatrice walked slowly inside, drawn to the books despite her nervousness. She tilted her head to read the spines. Philosophy, history, agricultural treatises, poetry, Byron, Wordsworth, Coleridge. "Do you read, Miss Ashford?" She spun around. The Duke of Greystone stood in the doorway, and Beatrice's carefully prepared composure wavered. She had expected someone older, severe, perhaps slightly dissolute, given his apparent desperation for an heir. Instead, Alexander Thorne was tall and lean, with broad shoulders beneath his perfectly tailored coat. Dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he'd been running his hands through it. His face was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, straight nose, strong jaw, and his eyes were a penetrating gray that seemed to see straight through her. He was, she realized with dismay, devastatingly handsome. And he was studying her with the same intensity she'd been studying in his library. "Yes, Your Grace," she managed, finding her voice. "I read a great deal. Philosophy." He nodded toward the shelf she'd been examining. "Sometimes, I prefer history personally, and poetry, though I know that's expected of ladies." "Is it?" He moved into the room with easy grace, closing the door behind him. "I found most ladies claim to enjoy poetry but have never actually read beyond Byron's most scandalous passages." Despite her nerves, Beatrice felt a spark of irritation. "Then you've been speaking with the wrong ladies, Your Grace." One dark eyebrow rose. "Have I indeed? Byron is brilliant, but his personal life shouldn't overshadow his work. Wordsworth captures emotion in nature better than anyone. Coleridge's imagery is haunting. And if you want true passion, read Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft wrote philosophy, not poetry." "She wrote the truth," Beatrice said, "which is better than either." For a long moment, Alexander simply stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, his lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Would you like some tea, Miss Ashford? You must be exhausted from your journey. Thank you, Your Grace. That would be most welcome. He rang for tea, then gestured to one of the chairs near the fire. Beatrice sat, acutely aware of his eyes on her as he took the seat opposite. My grandmother tells me you understand the nature of this arrangement, he said without preamble. I believe so, Your Grace. Then let me be absolutely clear. His voice was cool, businesslike. I need an heir. According to the terms of the entailment, I must produce one by my 35th birthday, which is in 4 months. If I fail, the dukedom passes to my cousin, who will undoubtedly run it into the ground within a year. I understand. Do you? He leaned forward slightly. I am not offering you romance, Miss Ashford. I am not offering you affection or companionship or any of the things young ladies typically expect from marriage. I am offering you a title, security, and a home in exchange for one thing, an heir. I understand that as well, Your Grace. Beatrice met his eyes steadily. I wrote that I required only safety and security. I meant it. I have no expectations of affection. I'm not a romantic girl dreaming of love. I'm a practical woman facing an impossible situation. And that situation would be? Here it was. The moment she would have to reveal just how desperate she truly was. My uncle died 3 weeks ago, she said, keeping her voice level. The estate was entailed to his cousin, Mr. Gerald Ashford. I have been ordered to vacate Thornbury Hall by the end of January. I have no income, no family willing to take me in, and no prospects for employment that would provide adequate protection. Protection from what? Alexander's eyes had sharpened. Beatrice hesitated. How much should she reveal? Would the truth make her seem damaged, unsuitable? But he had asked for honesty, and she needed him to understand why she was here, why she would agree to such a cold arrangement. Mr. Gerald Ashford has made it clear that he expects me to be grateful for his continued hospitality, she said carefully. He has suggested that there are ways I might earn my keep. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I see, Alexander said, his voice deadly quiet. And has he acted on these suggestions? He tried once. The housekeeper interrupted. But he will try again. Beatrice forced herself to hold his gaze. I do not wish to be dramatic, Your Grace, but I believe if I remain at Thornbury Hall past January, I will not remain there as a guest. I will become something else entirely. Then you will not remain there. The words came out hard, final. If we proceed with this arrangement, you will leave Thornbury immediately. Tomorrow, if possible. Relief flooded through her so intensely she nearly swayed. Then you are willing to proceed? I want to be clear about expectations. Alexander stood and moved to the window, his back to her. We will marry quickly. Special license, no fuss, minimal guests. After the wedding, you will move into the Duchess's apartments. They adjoin mine. We will fulfill our obligations to produce an heir as expeditiously as possible. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks but forced herself to remain composed. I understand. Once you are with a child, we will live separate lives. You will have your own household to manage, your own pursuits. I will not interfere with your activities, and I expect you will not interfere with mine. He turned back to face her. It will be, in every sense except legal, a business arrangement. That is acceptable to me, Your Grace. Is it? He studied her intently. You're 24. You'll be trapped in a marriage without love, bound to a man who can offer you nothing but security and a title. Are you truly certain you can accept that? Beatrice stood, meeting his eyes directly. Your Grace, 3 weeks ago I had a home, an uncle who cared for me, and a belief that somehow things would work out. Today I have nothing. Gerald Ashford waits at Thornbury Hall like a spider in his web, and winter is coming. You are offering me safety. That is not nothing. That is everything. Something flickered in Alexander's gray eyes. Respect, perhaps, or understanding. Very well, he said. I'll send it to the solicitor tomorrow. We'll arrange the marriage settlement, special license, everything. We can be married by week's weekend. So quickly. You said to yourself that winter is coming, Miss Ashford, and I have only 4 months. He moved back to stand before her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Are you certain? Once we begin this, there's no going back. Beatrice thought of Thornbury Hall, of Gerald's hands, of winter nights with nowhere to go and no one to protect her. I'm certain, she said. Then we have an agreement. He extended his hand, formal and businesslike. Beatrice placed her hand in his. His fingers were warm, strong, and the touch sent an unexpected jolt through her. His eyes widened slightly, as if he'd felt it too. Then he released her hand and stepped back, the professional distance immediately restored. Thornton will show you to your rooms. My grandmother will join you for dinner. I have an estate business that requires my attention this evening. It was clearly a dismissal. He was already turning back to his desk. Your Grace, Beatrice said, and he paused. Thank you for your honesty and for offering me this opportunity. Don't thank me yet, Miss Ashford, he said without turning around. You may come to regret this arrangement. I doubt that very much, Your Grace. After she left, Alexander stood at his desk, staring down at papers he couldn't focus on. His hand still tingled where he'd touched hers. That was unexpected and unwelcome. This was supposed to be simple, a practical solution to a practical problem. But Beatrice Ashford was not what he'd expected. He'd expected someone meek, grateful, easily managed. Instead, she'd stood before him with quiet dignity, discussing Wollstonecraft and meeting his eyes directly even while revealing her desperate situation. She was beautiful, he admitted to himself. Dark blonde hair, blue eyes that were intelligent and wary in equal measure, delicate features that somehow conveyed both vulnerability and strength. But beauty didn't matter. This wasn't about attraction. This was about duty. He would marry her, get her with a child, secure the succession. Then they would live separate lives, and he would never have to think about the way her hand had felt in his, or the flash of spirit in her eyes when she'd argued about poetry. Simple, practical, emotionless. So why did his hand still tingle? Greystone Abbey Chapel 6 days later. The wedding took place on a gray December morning in the Abbey's private chapel. Beatrice wore a gown of pale blue silk that the Dowager Duchess had commissioned for her, along with an entire wardrobe befitting a duchess. You cannot marry my grandson looking like a pauper, Marguerite had said briskly. It reflects poorly on the family. The gown was beautiful, far finer than anything Beatrice had ever owned. But as she stood before the altar with Alexander beside her, she felt like a fraud. The ceremony was perfunctory. The elderly rector who'd served the Thorne family for 40 years read the traditional words with practiced efficiency. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here. Beatrice barely heard him. She was too aware of Alexander standing rigidly beside her, his face an impassive mask, his responses to the vows delivered in a flat, emotionless tone. Wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife? I will. No hesitation, no emotion, just duty. When it was Beatrice's turn, she spoke her vows clearly, steadily, though her heart hammered in her chest. I will. Alexander slid a ring onto her finger, a heavy gold band engraved with the Thorne family crest. It was warm from his pocket, and the weight of it felt like a shackle and salvation in equal measure. I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride. Alexander turned to her, his expression still carefully blank. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so brief and chaste it barely qualified as contact. Then it was over. She was the Duchess of Greystone. The wedding breakfast that followed was a small, stilted affair. Besides Beatrice and Alexander, only the Dowager Duchess, Alexander's solicitor Mr. Pemberton, and his cousin Lord Edward Thorne were present. Lord Edward was nothing like Alexander. Where Alexander was all sharp edges and cold reserve, Edward was warm and jovial, with an easy smile and kind eyes. Welcome to the family, Your Grace, he said, raising his glass to Beatrice. I must say, Alexander, you've chosen well. Beauty and intelligence, a dangerous combination. Thank you, Lord Edward, Beatrice said, grateful for his warmth. Please call me Edward. We're family now, after all. He leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Don't let Alexander's brooding intimidate you. He's not nearly as fearsome as he pretends to be. I can hear you, Edward, Alexander said dryly. Good. Then perhaps you'll take the hint and smile at your bride occasionally. You look like you're attending a funeral, not a wedding. A muscle ticked in Alexander's jaw, but he said nothing. The Dowager Duchess cleared her throat. Now that the formalities are complete, perhaps we should discuss the next steps. Grandmother, Alexander said warningly. Oh, don't be prudish, Alexander. You're both adults, and the entire purpose of this marriage is to produce an heir. The sooner that's accomplished, the better. She turned to Beatrice with a surprisingly gentle expression. My dear, I know this is all very sudden and unconventional. If you have questions, I'm available to answer them, though I imagine you understand what's expected. Beatrice felt her cheeks flame, but she kept her voice steady. I understand, Your Grace. Excellent. Then I'll leave you young people to become acquainted with. Marguerite rose, signaling the end of the meal. Edward, Mr. Pemberton, shall we adjourn to the drawing room? After they left, Beatrice and Alexander sat in awkward silence. I have an estate business to attend to, Alexander said finally, not meeting her eyes. Thornton will show you to the Duchess's apartments. My valet will have prepared everything you'll need. I'll come to you this evening. Of course, Your Grace. Alexander, he corrected, still not looking at her. We're married. You should use my given name. Alexander, she repeated softly. He stood abruptly. I apologize for the briefness of the ceremony, and for the lack of celebration. This isn't what young women typically dream of for their wedding day. I told you I'm not a typical young woman, Beatrice said. And I told you I have no romantic expectations. Yes, you did. Finally, he looked at her, and something unreadable flickered in his gray eyes. Nevertheless, you deserve better than this. Before she could respond, he was gone. The Duchess's apartments that evening. The Duchess's apartments were magnificent. A large sitting room decorated in shades of cream and gold, with elegant furniture and a fire already blazing in the hearth. Through one door, Beatrice could see a bedroom with an enormous four-poster bed draped in silk hangings. Through another, a dressing room filled with the new wardrobe the Dowager Duchess had ordered. It was beautiful, luxurious, everything she'd lost when her uncle died. But as evening fell and the appointed hour approached, Beatrice found herself unable to settle. She paced the sitting room, her new silk dressing gown swishing around her ankles. Her lady's maid, she was still adjusting to that, had helped her prepare. Bath, hair brushed out, the finest nightgown she'd ever worn. All in preparation for the consummation of a marriage to a man she'd known for less than a week. A man who wanted nothing from her but an heir. A knock at the connecting door to Alexander's apartments made her jump. Come in, she managed. Alexander entered, wearing his own dressing gown over what appeared to be nothing but trousers. His dark hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He looked as uncomfortable as she felt. Beatrice, he said, I want to be clear about something before we proceed. Yes, this doesn't have to happen tonight. If you need more time to adjust, to feel comfortable, I can wait. The kindness in his voice surprised her. This was the first time all day he'd shown any emotion beyond cold duty. We have 4 months, she said quietly. Less than 4 months, really. And you said to yourself we need to be expeditious. Nevertheless, I won't force this if you're not ready. Beatrice studied him. This complicated man who'd married her for purely practical reasons, but was now offering her a choice. I'm ready, she said. Not because I have romantic notions about our wedding night, but because I understand what's required, and I see no reason to delay. He nodded slowly. Very well. But Beatrice, I need you to understand something. I will try not to make it unpleasant for you. But I've never done this with the goal of reproduction rather than pleasure. I'm not certain I'll be particularly good at balancing both. Are you saying you've never? She trailed off, confused. I'm saying I've had lovers, he said bluntly. Women I cared about or at least desired. This is different. You're my wife, yes, but we barely know each other. It feels somewhat mechanical. Then perhaps, Beatrice heard herself say, surprising herself with her boldness, we should try to know each other a little better first. Alexander blinked. I'm not sure I follow. You said we'll live separate lives once I'm with child. That means we have perhaps a few weeks where we'll need to interact regularly. It might be easier if we weren't complete strangers. What do you propose? Talk to me. She moved to sit on the settee near the fire and gestured for him to join her. Not about the estate or the entailment or duties. Just talk to me like I'm a person you might actually find interesting. After a moment's hesitation, Alexander sat beside her, carefully maintaining a proper distance. What would you like to know? He asked. Why did you become a duke at 21? The Dowager Duchess mentioned your father died suddenly, but she didn't elaborate. Pain flickered across his face. Riding accident. He was inspecting fences on the North Estate. His horse spooked, threw him. He broke his neck. Died instantly. I'm so sorry. It was 13 years ago. I've made my peace with it. But his voice said otherwise. He was a good man, a good duke. He cared about his responsibilities, his tenants, doing things properly. I've tried to follow his example. Is that why this arrangement matters so much to you? Because it's what he would have done. Alexander looked at her sharply. What makes you say that? Because you don't seem like a man who enjoys being managed by his grandmother, Beatrice said. But you're going through with this anyway, marrying a stranger to fulfill your duty. That speaks to something deeper than just preserving the dukedom. He was quiet for a long moment. My father spent his entire life building this estate, caring for the people who depend on it. When he died, I was barely more than a boy. I had to learn everything. Estate management, parliamentary responsibilities, how to be a duke. While grieving for him, his hands clenched on his knees. I will not let his work be destroyed because I failed in my duty. I will not let Reginald undo everything my father built. Then we're more alike than I thought, Beatrice said softly. How so? My father died when I was 15, my mother when I was 8. I understand what it means to lose someone and then spend years trying to honor their memory by doing what you think they would have wanted. She looked into the fire. Sometimes I wonder if I'm living my own life or just trying to live up to ghosts. Alexander turned to face her more fully, genuine interest in his eyes now. And what would you want if not for the ghosts? If you could choose your own life? No one had ever asked her that before. I don't know, she admitted. I've spent so long just trying to survive, to be grateful for what little I had, that I've never let myself want anything more. But if I could, she hesitated. I think I'd want a purpose, not just existing or fulfilling duties, but doing something that mattered. Helping people, maybe making some small corner of the world better. That's a duchess's prerogative, Alexander said. The estate has charitable foundations, tenant welfare programs. You'd have considerable resources to do exactly that if you wished. Even though we'll be living separate lives, even then, you'll be the Duchess of Greystone. That comes with responsibilities. Yes, but also freedom to pursue your own interests within appropriate bounds. They talked for over an hour. About books, about philosophy, about the responsibilities of the peerage and the hypocrisy of society's rules. Beatrice found herself relaxing, discovering that when Alexander forgot to be coldly dutiful, he was actually engaging, intelligent, thoughtful, with occasional flashes of dry humor that made her smile. And Alexander, despite his best intentions to remain emotionally detached, found himself genuinely interested in what Beatrice had to say. She was quick-witted, well-read, and possessed an honesty that was refreshing after years of navigating society's careful deceptions. Finally, as the fire burned low, Alexander stood. It's late, he said quietly, and I believe we've become slightly better acquainted. Beatrice rose as well, her heart beginning to pound again. Yes. He extended his hand. After a moment, she took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and this time neither of them pulled away immediately. I meant what I said, Alexander murmured. I'll try to make this as gentle as I can. I know, Beatrice whispered. What followed was awkward at times, uncertain at others. They were both nervous despite their best efforts to appear composed. But Alexander was patient, careful, and true to his word. And when it was over, as Beatrice lay in the large bed beside her new husband, she thought perhaps this arrangement wouldn't be quite as cold as she'd expected. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was room for something more than mere duty. But as Alexander rose from the bed and began to dress, preparing to return to his own apartments, she reminded herself not to hope for too much. This was a business arrangement. For months to conceive an heir, then separate lives. She couldn't afford to want more than that. Good night, Beatrice, Alexander said from the doorway. Good night, Alexander. After he left, Beatrice stared up at the canopy above the bed and touched the heavy ring on her finger. She was a duchess now. She was safe. That would have to be enough. The next 6 weeks, the days fell into a pattern. In the mornings, Alexander attended an estate business. He rose early, breakfast alone in his study while reviewing correspondence, and often rode out to inspect various parts of the vast Greystone holdings. Beatrice, meanwhile, learned what it meant to be a duchess. The Dowager Marguerite proved to be an exacting but fair teacher. She tutored Beatrice in household management, the intricate social hierarchies of the peerage, which families were allied and which feuding, and the delicate art of charitable work that enhanced the family's reputation without appearing ostentatious. You represent 300 years of Thorne family history, Marguerite said during one particularly intense session on precedence and protocol. Every word you speak, every decision you make, reflects on Alexander and the dukedom. You must be above reproach. It was exhausting, but also, Beatrice discovered, oddly satisfying. For the first time in years, she had purpose. She oversaw the household staff with growing confidence, reviewed the estate's charitable accounts and suggested improvements, and began planning a medical fund for tenant families who couldn't afford doctors. And every evening, after dinner, Alexander would come to her apartments. At first, it had been purely perfunctory. They would speak briefly, fulfill their obligation to produce an heir, and then Alexander would withdraw to his own rooms. But gradually, something shifted. Started small. One evening, Alexander arrived to find Beatrice reading by the fire. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward the book. "Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. I found it in your library." He blinked. "You're reading Adam Smith for pleasure? Is there any other reason to read?" She looked up with a slight smile. "Your library is remarkable, Alexander. I've never had access to such resources. It would be a shame to waste them on fashion magazines and novels. Most women would disagree with you. I'm not most women. You married me specifically because I'm not a woman." He'd laughed at that, a genuine sound that transformed his usually stern features. After that, he began arriving earlier. They would talk for an hour or more before fulfilling their marital obligations. Alexander discovered that Beatrice had opinions on everything: agricultural reform, the Irish situation, workers' rights, and that she could argue her positions with logic and passion. "You sound like a radical," he'd said once, but there was amusement in his tone rather than criticism. "I sound like someone who's seen what poverty actually looks like," she'd countered. "Your tenants are fortunate, Alexander. You care about their welfare. Not all landowners do. My father taught me that privilege comes with responsibility. Then he taught you well." Another evening, Alexander had arrived looking particularly haggard. "Difficult day?" Beatrice asked. "Endless. The parliamentary session ran long. Then I had to settle a dispute between two tenant families over water rights. Then the steward informed me we need to replace the entire roof on the east wing." He'd run his hand through his hair in that gesture she'd come to recognize. "Sometimes I wonder if my father had any idea why he was leaving me." "Sit," Beatrice said, surprising herself. "Let me help." "Help how?" Tell me about the water dispute. Maybe talking through it will help you see a solution. He'd looked skeptical but complied. As he explained the complex situation, Beatrice listened carefully, asking clarifying questions. By the end, they'd worked out a compromise that satisfied both families. You should have been a diplomat, Alexander said, looking at her with something like wonder. That's the first sensible solution anyone's suggested. I'm a duchess now, Beatrice replied. Isn't diplomacy part of the job? After that, Alexander began bringing his problems to her regularly. Estate matters, political dilemmas, difficult decisions. She didn't always have answers, but she listened, and somehow her presence made the burdens easier to bear. One particularly cold evening in late January, nearly 6 weeks after their wedding, Alexander arrived to find Beatrice wrapped in blankets by the fire, looking pale. "Are you ill?" he asked immediately, concerned. "No, just cold. I can't seem to get warm today." Without a word, he'd left and returned minutes later with his own thicker blankets and a pot of hot tea. "Here." He draped the blankets around her shoulders, then poured tea himself, adding sugar the way she liked it. "Better." "Yes, thank you." She'd looked up at him, surprised by the care in his actions. "You didn't have to do that. You're my wife," he'd said simply. "Of course I did." That night, after their usual intimacy, Alexander hadn't immediately left. Instead, he'd lingered, lying beside her in the darkness. "Beatrice," he said quietly, "may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy? Here, I mean, as happy as you can be, given the circumstances of our arrangement?" She'd considered the question carefully. "I'm content," she said finally. "More than content. I'm safe. I have purpose. I'm treated with respect and kindness. That's more than I dared hope for a few months ago." "But are you happy?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent so long just surviving that I'm not sure I know what happiness feels like anymore. But this," she gestured vaguely at the room, at him. "This is good, Alexander. Better than I expected." He'd been quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "It's better than I expected too." A few nights later, disaster struck. Beatrice woke in the early hours of the morning with terrible cramping in her abdomen. She tried to ignore it, but the pain grew worse, accompanied by a warmth between her legs that made her heart sink with dread. She lit a candle with shaking hands and looked down. Blood. Not much, but enough. No. She wasn't even certain she'd been with child. It had only been 6 weeks, but the timing, the symptoms, she'd lost it. Lost Alexander's heir before she'd even known for certain it existed. The pain was physical, yes, but the emotional devastation was worse. She'd failed. Failed at the one task that was required of her. Beatrice. She looked up to find Alexander standing in the connecting doorway, apparently roused by the candlelight. He was in his shirt sleeves, hair disheveled from sleep. Then he saw her face, saw the blood on the sheets. What happened? He was across the room in an instant, kneeling beside the bed. "Are you hurt?" I think I was pregnant," she whispered. "I think I've lost it." The color drained from his face. "Lost it? Are you certain?" "No, but the symptoms. I should call for the doctor." "Stay here," he commanded, then strode from the room shouting for servants. The next hours passed in a blur. The doctor was summoned from the village. Beatrice was examined, which was mortifying, and then left with orders to rest. "It's difficult to be certain," Dr. Hendricks said to Alexander while Beatrice listened from the bed. "She may have been in early pregnancy and miscarried, or it may simply be an unusually difficult monthly course. Either way, there's no permanent damage. She should rest for a few days, but she'll recover fully." After the doctor left, Alexander sat in the chair beside her bed, his face unreadable. "I'm sorry," Beatrice said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Alexander. I failed you." "Failed me?" He looked at her as if she'd spoken a foreign language. "Beatrice, you're hurt and frightened, and you think you've failed me?" We have so little time left and Stop. He took her hand, his grip almost painful in its intensity. This isn't your fault. Do you understand me? If you were pregnant and lost the child, that's not failure. That's a tragedy. And if you weren't pregnant at all, then we simply continue trying. But you have not failed. But your heir can wait, he said firmly. Right now, the only thing that matters is that you're all right. Do you understand? Your health, your safety, that's what matters. Beatrice stared at him through her tears, seeing something in his face she'd never seen before. Real fear, real concern, not for his heir, for her. Alexander, rest, he said, his voice gentler now. I'll stay with you. I'm not going anywhere. And he didn't. He pulled the chair closer to the bed and held her hand while she fell into an exhausted sleep. When she woke hours later, gray morning light filtering through the windows, he was still there. Asleep in the chair, his hand still holding hers, his face drawn and tired. Beatrice watched him sleep. This man who'd married her for duty but had stayed by her bedside all night because he was worried about her. Something in her chest tightened painfully. Oh no. Oh no, no, no. She was falling in love with him. This was supposed to be business. Practical. Emotionless. But somewhere between poetry debates and estate planning sessions, between gentle intimacies and thoughtful conversations, she'd started to care for Alexander Thorne far more than was safe or wise. And that was a problem because he'd been clear from the beginning. Once she conceived an heir, they would live separate lives. He would never love her back. She needed to protect her heart, needed to maintain the emotional distance that would allow her to survive the years ahead in a marriage of convenience. But looking at him now, exhausted from staying by her side, she knew it was already too late. She was in love with her husband, and it was going to break her heart. The next few weeks, Beatrice recovered quickly, just as the doctor predicted. Within a week, she was back to her normal activities, though Alexander insisted she not overexert herself. He'd become oddly protective since that night. He checked on her multiple times a day, asked how she was feeling, and looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse race and her traitorous heart hope for things that could never be. But at the same time, something had shifted in him. He'd become more distant emotionally even as he was more attentive physically. He still came to her apartment every evening, but now he arrived later and left more quickly. The long conversations had stopped. He was polite, careful, even gentle, but the warmth that had been developing between them had vanished. It was as if he'd realized they were getting too close and deliberately stepped back. Beatrice told herself it was for the best. If he was pulling away, it would be easier to guard her own heart. But it hurt. God, it hurts. One evening in mid-February, as winter began its slow retreat towards spring, the Dowager Duchess summoned Beatrice to the drawing room. "Sit down, my dear," Marguerite said, her expression unusually kind. "I want to discuss something with you." Beatrice sat wary. "Have I done something wrong?" "On the contrary, you've exceeded every expectation. The household runs smoothly under your management. The staff respect you. The tenants speak highly of your charitable efforts. You've been everything a Duchess of Greystone should be." "Thank you, Your Grace. But I've noticed something troubling." Marguerite fixed her with that penetrating stare. "You're in love with my grandson, aren't you?" Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. I don't. Don't bother denying it, child. I've been observing people for 73 years. I know what love looks like." She paused. "And I know what heartbreak looks like too. You're heading for both." "I'm aware," Beatrice said quietly. "But I didn't intend to fall in love with him. It just happened." "Does he know?" "No, and he can't know. He made it very clear this was a business arrangement. Once I conceive an heir, we'll live separate lives. Loving him won't change that." Marguerite was quiet for a long moment. "My grandson is a fool," she said finally. "Your Grace. He's a brilliant administrator, a responsible duke, and a good man. But when it comes to his own happiness, he's an absolute fool." She leaned forward. "Do you know why he's so determined to keep this marriage purely practical? Because that's what he agreed to. What we both agreed to. No, it's because he's terrified. Marguerite's voice softened. When Alexander was 23, he fell in love with a young lady, Lady Catherine Fairfax. She was beautiful, charming, everything society deemed perfect. He courted her for a year, and she accepted his proposal. Beatrice's stomach twisted. What happened? 2 weeks before the wedding, he discovered she'd been secretly meeting with his best friend. She'd been using Alexander for his title while conducting an affair. When he confronted her, she laughed and told him she could never love someone as cold and duty-bound as him. She broke the engagement and married the friend within 3 months. That's horrible. It destroyed something in Alexander. He closed himself off emotionally, threw himself into his duties, and swore he'd never let himself be vulnerable again. Marguerite met Beatrice's eyes. That's why he proposed this arrangement. A marriage without love means a marriage where he can't be hurt. Then I have no chance, Beatrice whispered. If he's determined not to love anyone, there's nothing I can do. I didn't say that. A small smile played about Marguerite's lips. I said he's a fool, not that he's beyond hope. He cares for you, Beatrice. I've seen it in how he looks at you when you're not paying attention, how he asks about you constantly, how devastated he was when he thought you'd miscarried. Caring isn't love. No, but it's a start. Marguerite stood. Don't give up on him yet, my dear. Sometimes even fools can come to their senses. They just need the right motivation. After Marguerite left, Beatrice sat alone in the drawing room, her mind whirling. Alexander had been hurt, betrayed by someone he loved. It explained so much. His coldness, his insistence on keeping their arrangement purely practical, the way he'd pulled back when they'd started to grow close. He wasn't unfeeling. He was protecting himself. But knowing that didn't change her situation. He'd been clear about his intentions, and she had no right to demand more than he'd promised. Still, Marguerite's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes even fools can come to their senses. Perhaps there was hope after all. Or perhaps she was the fool, hoping for something that could never be. Late February, 8 weeks after the wedding. The announcement came from Lady Ashford via letter on a cold February afternoon. Beatrice was in the morning room reviewing household accounts when Thornton brought in the post. Among the usual correspondence was a letter bearing her aunt's seal. She opened it with mild curiosity. She'd had no contact with her aunt since the wedding, which suited her fine. Aunt Cordelia had made it clear that Beatrice's situation was not her problem. But as Beatrice read the letter, her blood ran cold. My dear niece, I write with most distressing news. Your cousin Gerald has suffered a terrible accident. He was found at the bottom of the main staircase at Thornbury Hall 3 days ago. The doctors say he struck his head and never regained consciousness. He passed away yesterday morning. As Gerald had no heirs and no other male relatives, the estate reverts to the crown. Thornbury Hall is to be closed permanently. I thought you should know, given your years of residence there. Your affectionate aunt, Cordelia. Gerald was dead. Beatrice should have felt something, shock, grief, something. Instead, all she felt was a hollow relief. He couldn't hurt her anymore, couldn't hurt anyone else. But the letter continued, and the next paragraph made her hands shake. In a curious development, the magistrate has requested to speak with you regarding Gerald's death. There seems to be some questions about the circumstances of his fall. A maid reported seeing a figure near the staircase that night, and several of Gerald's acquaintances have mentioned that he'd been speaking of you in the weeks before his death. The magistrate merely wishes to eliminate any confusion. I'm certain it's nothing, but I thought you should be prepared. He plans to call upon you at Greystone Abbey within the week. The room spun. The magistrate thought, what? That she had something to do with Gerald's death? She'd been at Greystone Abbey for over 2 months. She couldn't possibly have, unless they thought she'd arranged it somehow, paid someone, conspired. Dear God, if suspicion fell on her, it would destroy everything. Her marriage, Alexander's reputation, the carefully built life she'd started to create here. And if they arrested her, tried her, women had been hanged for less. Your Grace, are you quite all right? She looked up to find the housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, watching her with concern. Yes, I'm fine. Just some unexpected news. Beatrice folded the letter with shaking hands. Is His Grace in the Abbey? He rode out to the North Fields this morning, Your Grace. He should return by luncheon. Thank you. Beatrice spent the next hours in an agony of waiting. She tried to focus on her tasks but couldn't concentrate. The letter burned in her pocket like an accusation. When Alexander finally returned, wind-blown and covered in a light dusting of snow, she was waiting in his study. Beatrice. He looked surprised to see her there. Is something wrong? She handed him the letter silently. He read it quickly, his expression darkening with each line. When he finished, he looked up at her with an unreadable expression. Gerald Ashford is dead, he said flatly. Yes. And the magistrate wants to question you. Yes. Did you have anything to do with his death? The question was direct, almost harsh. Beatrice's temper flared. Of course not. I've been here for 2 months. How could I possibly? I had to ask, Alexander said, his voice gentler now. I needed to hear you say it. You think I'm capable of murder? I think you were desperate enough to marry a stranger to escape him. I think you were terrified of what he might do to you. Alexander moved closer, his eyes searching her face. I think if you'd been cornered, afraid, defending yourself, I would understand. I didn't kill him, Alexander. I swear it. Then we have nothing to worry about. But his jaw was tight. The magistrate can ask his questions. You'll tell the truth. That's all. And if he doesn't believe me, if he decides I'm a suspect, then I'll hire the best solicitors in England to prove your innocence. You're the Duchess of Greystone now, Beatrice. That means something. You have protection. His certainty should have comforted her. Instead, it made her chest ache. He was protecting her out of duty, because she was his wife, his responsibility, not because he loved her. Thank you, she said quietly, for believing me. Always, he said, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. But before she could respond, he'd turned away, already calling for Thornton to send word to his solicitors. 3 days later, Magistrate Pemberley arrived on a gray, cold morning. He was a thin, severe man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Alexander insisted on being present for the interview, and Beatrice was grateful for his solid presence beside her. Your Grace, Pemberley said to Beatrice, after the preliminaries were complete. I understand you resided at Thornbury Hall until recently. Yes, I lived there with my uncle, Lord Ashford, until his death. Then his cousin, Mr. Gerald Ashford, inherited the estate. And your relationship with Mr. Gerald Ashford was non-existent. He was a distant relation I'd never met before he took possession of Thornbury Hall. I see. And yet several witnesses report that Mr. Ashford spoke of you frequently in the weeks before his death. He told at least 3 people that you would regret refusing his generosity. Pemberley's eyes narrowed. What did he mean by that? Beatrice felt Alexander tense beside her. Mr. Ashford made unwelcome advances, she said carefully. When I made it clear I would not accept them, he became angry. That's why I left Thornbury Hall. Unwelcome advances. Pemberley made a note. And you left to marry the Duke of Greystone quite suddenly, did you not? The marriage was arranged quickly due to circumstances of the entailment. Alexander interjected coldly. What relevance does this have to Gerald Ashford's death? I'm merely establishing a motive, Your Grace. Motive? Alexander's voice turned dangerous. Are you suggesting my wife had something to do with Ashford's death? I'm suggesting that lady, excuse me, the Duchess, had reason to wish Mr. Ashford harm. He made unwelcome advances, as she admits. He threatened her. She fled to marry you quite suddenly. And now he's dead under suspicious circumstances. I was here, Beatrice said, her voice shaking slightly. At Greystone Abbey. I haven't left the estate since I arrived 2 months ago. How could I possibly have been involved? You couldn't have been personally present, no. But someone could have acted on your behalf. Someone could have been sent. That is enough. Alexander stood, his fury barely controlled. You will not come into my home and accuse my wife of conspiracy to murder based on nothing more than a dead man's spiteful comments and your own suppositions. The Duchess has been here, under my protection, surrounded by dozens of witnesses, since the day we married. If you wish to pursue this absurd line of questioning further, you may do so through our solicitors. Otherwise, this interview is concluded. Pemberley stood as well, unintimidated. I'm merely doing my job, Your Grace. Then do it elsewhere. Thornton will show you out. After the magistrate left, Beatrice sank into her chair, shaking. He thinks I'm guilty. He thinks he has a suspicious death and a convenient suspect, Alexander said grimly. But he has no evidence because there is no evidence. You didn't do this, Beatrice. But what if he arrests me anyway? What if? He won't. Alexander knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his. I won't let him. Do you understand? I will not let anyone harm you. Not Gerald Ashford. Not Magistrate Pemberley. No one. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why do you care so much? This was supposed to be a business arrangement, Alexander. You were supposed to get an heir and then we'd live separate lives. But you're ready to fight a magistrate for me. Why? He stared at her, something turbulent in his gray eyes. Because you're my wife. Because I made vows to protect you. Because what? Because somewhere in the last 2 months this stopped being business, he said roughly. And I don't know what to do about that. Beatrice's heart stopped. Alexander! A knock at the door interrupted them. Alexander pulled away, his expression shuddering. Yes. Thornton entered, looking apologetic. Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, but there's an urgent message from the North Estate. The river has flooded due to the snowmelt, and several tenant cottages are threatened. Damn! Alexander stood. I have to go. Beatrice, will discuss this later. Stay inside. Don't worry about Pemberley. I'll handle it. Then he was gone, leaving Beatrice alone with his half-finished confession echoing in her ears. Somewhere in the last 2 months, this stopped being business. What did that mean? That he cared for her? She couldn't let herself hope. Not when so much was uncertain. But hope, she was learning, was impossible to control. That night, the flood crisis kept Alexander away all day and into the evening. By the time he returned, exhausted and mud-splattered, Beatrice was pacing her apartments anxiously. She heard him enter his own rooms, heard the sounds of servants bringing water for a bath. She should leave him alone, let him rest. But his words from this morning wouldn't stop echoing in her mind, and she needed to know what he'd meant. She knocked on the connecting door. Come in, his voice called. She entered to find him in shirt sleeves, his hair damp from washing, fatigue written in every line of his body. Are the tenants safe? She asked. Yes, we managed to divert most of the water. A few cottages have minor damage, but no one was hurt. He looked at her, and something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. You came to check on me. Of course I did. You were gone all day dealing with a crisis. Most wives wouldn't care, as long as the crisis didn't affect them directly. I'm not most wives, Beatrice said softly. No, he agreed. You're not. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken things. Alexander, what you said this morning. I shouldn't have said it, he interrupted. I was angry at Pemberley, worried about you, not thinking clearly. But did you mean it? She moved closer. You said this stopped being business. What did you mean? He turned away, his shoulders tense. It doesn't matter what I meant. It matters to me. Why? He spun back to face her. Why does it matter, Beatrice? We agreed to the terms of this marriage. We both knew what we were getting into. Feelings were never part of the arrangement. And if feelings developed anyway? She challenged me. Are we supposed to just ignore them? Pretend they don't exist? Yes, he said harshly. That's exactly what we're supposed to do. Why? Because love is a lie. The words burst from him with shocking intensity. It's a pretty story people tell themselves before reality destroys it. I learned that the hard way once, and I will not make that mistake again. Lady Catherine Fairfax, Beatrice said quietly. He froze. How do you know about Catherine? Your grandmother told me about how she betrayed you, how she broke your heart. My grandmother had no right. She was trying to help me understand why you're so determined to keep this marriage purely practical. Beatrice moved closer still. Alexander, what Catherine did to you was terrible. But I'm not her. I know that. Do you? Because you're treating me as if I'm going to hurt you the moment you let yourself care. Her voice broke slightly. I would never do that to you. You don't understand. He ran his hands through his hair, that familiar gesture of frustration. It's not about whether you would hurt me intentionally. It's about what happens when reality sets in. When the novelty wears off and you realize you're trapped in a marriage with a man who's cold and duty-bound and incapable of being anything else. That's not who you are, Beatrice said fiercely. You're kind and thoughtful, and you care so deeply about your responsibilities that it consumes you. You sat by my bedside all night when you thought I'd miscarried. You stood up to a magistrate for me. You're not cold, Alexander. You're afraid. And if I am? He challenged. What then? You think caring for each other will magically solve everything? Make this marriage into something it was never meant to be. I think it already has, Beatrice said, whether you want to admit it or not. The silence between them was deafening. I can't do this, Alexander said finally, his voice raw. I can't let myself love you, Beatrice. I can't be that vulnerable again. Then what are we supposed to do? She whispered. Spend the rest of our lives pretending? Living in the same house but separate lives. Always holding back. Always afraid. If that's what it takes to survive, yes. That's not surviving, Alexander. That's existing. There's a difference. He looked at her, and for a moment she saw everything he was feeling. Longing, fear, desire, desperation. All warring in his gray eyes. Then his expression shuddered. I need to rest. We can discuss this another time. It was a dismissal, clear and final. Beatrice felt something crack in her chest, but she held herself together. Of course. Good night, Alexander. She returned to her own apartments and closed the connecting door. Then, finally alone, she let herself cry. She'd been a fool. A romantic fool, just like the girl who'd believed in fairy tales before life taught her better. Alexander had been clear from the beginning. He didn't want love. I didn't want emotional entanglement. And she'd gone and fallen in love with him anyway. Now she would spend the rest of her life married to a man she loved who would never let himself love her back. It was worse than being alone. It was being alone while standing next to someone you desperately wanted to be close to. Winter had passed. Spring was coming. But for Beatrice, it felt like winter would last forever. Early March, 10 weeks after the wedding. The following days were agonizing. Alexander withdrew completely, emotionally and physically. He stopped coming to her apartments in the evenings. He took his meals in his study. When they encountered each other in the halls, he was coldly polite and nothing more. It was as if their conversation had never happened. As if he'd decided the safest course was to pretend she didn't exist. Beatrice tried to focus on her duties. The household still needed managing. The charitable projects still required attention. But everything felt hollow now. 1 week after their argument, Beatrice woke feeling nauseated. She made it to the wash basin barely in time, retching miserably. When the wave passed, she stood there trembling, one hand pressed to her stomach. No. Not now. She waited 3 more days to be certain, but the symptoms persisted. Nausea in the mornings, exhaustion, tender breasts. She was pregnant. She should have felt triumphant. This was the goal after all, the entire purpose of their marriage. Instead, she felt hollow, because once Alexander knew she was carrying his heir, their marriage would be over in every meaningful sense. He would have what he needed. There would be no reason to interact at all. She would spend the next 6 months growing his child, then the rest of her life raising it, while Alexander lived his separate life just down the hall. It was everything they'd agreed to, and it was unbearable. She delayed telling him for 2 more days, desperately holding on to the illusion that they were still trying, that he might still come back to her. But on the 3rd day, the Dowager Duchess summoned her. "You're pregnant," Marguerite said without preamble. "Don't bother denying it. I've borne 3 children. I recognize the signs." "Yes," Beatrice admitted. "I believe so. Have you told Alexander?" "Not yet." "Why not? This is what he's been waiting for. What you've both been working toward." "I know." Beatrice looked down at her hands. "That's why I haven't told him. Because once I do, it's over. The marriage becomes exactly what he wanted it to be from the beginning. Practical, distant, empty." Marguerite studied her for a long moment. "You love him." "Yes. And he loves you, though he's too much of a stubborn fool to admit it." "It doesn't matter if he loves me," Beatrice said quietly. "He'll never let himself acknowledge it. He's too afraid of being hurt again." "Then perhaps," Marguerite said thoughtfully, "he needs a reason to face that fear." "What do you mean?" "Tell him about the pregnancy. But don't accept his withdrawal. Don't let him hide behind duty and distance. Make him confront what he's throwing away." "I've tried. He won't listen." "Then make him listen." Marguerite's voice turned fierce. "Fight for him, Beatrice. Fight for your marriage. Because if you don't, you'll both spend the rest of your lives regretting what might have been." That evening, Beatrice found Alexander in his study, as usual, reviewing estate documents by candlelight. She didn't knock, simply opened the door and walked in. "Beatrice." He looked up, surprised. "Is something wrong?" "I'm pregnant," she said without preamble. The pen in his hand froze. "You're certain?" "As certain as one can be without a doctor's confirmation. But yes, all the signs are there." For a moment, pure joy flashed across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by that careful, neutral mask he'd perfected. "That's excellent news," he said formally. "We should send for Dr. Hendricks tomorrow to confirm. And you'll need to rest more. No more long hours managing the household." "We'll need to." "Alexander, stop," Beatrice interrupted. "Stop what?" "Stop treating me like a broodmare whose only value is the child I'm carrying." Her voice shook with emotion she could no longer contain. "Stop pretending you don't feel anything. Stop hiding behind duty and obligations and fear." "Beatrice, I love you," she said, and watched him flinch as if she'd struck him. "I know that wasn't part of our arrangement. I know you don't want to hear it. But I love you, Alexander. I've loved you for weeks now. And I think you love me too. But you're too afraid to admit it." "Love has nothing to do with this marriage," he said harshly. "We agreed." "I don't care what we agreed." The words burst from her. "I don't care about the arrangement or the terms or any of it anymore. Care about you, about us, about the fact that we could have something real and meaningful, but you're too terrified to reach for it. And you're too naive to understand that love doesn't last." Alexander stood, his control finally cracking. "You think because we've had pleasant conversations and I've been kind to you that means something permanent? It doesn't. Eventually, you'll wake up and realize you're married to a man who's exactly what Catherine said. Cold and duty-bound and incapable of giving you what you deserve." "Catherine was wrong," Beatrice said fiercely. "You're not cold. You're wounded. There's a difference. The result is the same." "No, it's not. Because a wound can heal, Alexander. If you let it." He turned away from her, his hands braced on his desk. "I can't do this. I can't let myself hope and then watch it fall apart. I won't survive it again." "So you'd rather survive half a life? Going through the motions, fulfilling your duties, but never letting yourself feel anything real." She moved closer. "That's not living, Alexander. That's the coward's way out." He whirled on her, fury in his eyes. "You think I'm a coward?" "I think you're terrified," she said, refusing to back down. "I think one person hurt you badly, and you've spent years protecting yourself by never letting anyone close enough to hurt you again. But that's not strength, Alexander. That's fear." "And what would you have me do?" he demanded. "Throw caution to the wind? Bare my heart and hope you don't destroy it?" "Yes." Beatrice said simply. That's exactly what I'm asking you to do. Take a chance. Trust me. Trust us. I can't. Why not? Because if I let myself love you, Alexander said, his voice breaking, and you leave, whether you mean to or not, it will destroy me. I barely survived it the first time, Beatrice. I won't survive it again. Then it's a good thing I'm not going anywhere, she said softly. He looked at her, searching her face desperately. You say that now, but what about 5 years from now? 10? When the novelty has worn off and you're trapped in a marriage with a man who can barely express emotion, then I'll still be here, Beatrice said, loving you, building a life with you, raising our children. I'm not Catherine, Alexander. I won't leave when things get difficult. I won't betray you. I'll be here, for better or worse, in sickness and health, until death do us part. Those were the vows I made, and I meant every word. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. I love you. I love your intelligence and your dedication and your dry humor. I love how seriously you take your responsibilities. I love that you stayed by my bedside all night when you thought I'd miscarried. I love that you stood up to a magistrate for me. I love you, Alexander Thorne, and nothing you say is going to change that. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Alexander crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, his embrace almost painful in its intensity. I'm terrified, he whispered against her hair. Absolutely terrified. I know, she whispered back. I don't know how to do this. How to love someone without constantly waiting for it to end. We'll figure it out together. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and she could see tears in his gray eyes. I love you, he said, the words raw and unpractical. God help me. Beatrice, I love you. I've loved you for weeks now, and it's been torture pretending I didn't. Then stop pretending, she said, and he did. He kissed her with a desperate passion that spoke of weeks of denial and fear and longing finally unleashed. She kissed him back just as fiercely, pouring everything she felt into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you, he murmured. Yes, you do. You absolutely do. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to mess this up. There will be times when I retreat behind my walls because it's the only way I know how to cope. Then I'll be patient. I'll wait until you're ready to come out again. She cupped his face in her hands. I'm not asking for perfection, Alexander. I'm asking for honesty, for effort, for a real partnership instead of a business arrangement. You'll have it, he promised. All of it. Everything I have to give. He kissed her again, slower this time, tender and full of promise. Take me to bed, Beatrice whispered. Not because we're trying for an heir. Not because it's our duty. Because we love each other. Yes, Alexander breathed. God, yes. What followed was nothing like their previous encounters, those careful, dutiful couplings designed solely for reproduction. This was passion and tenderness and desperate need all woven together. They took their time, learning each other's bodies anew. Now that emotion was allowed to be part of it. Alexander worshipped every inch of her with hands and mouth and whispered words of love that he'd held back for so long. Beatrice met his passion with her own, finally free to show him how much she wanted him, loved him, needed him. When they came together, it was with an intensity that left them both shaking. And afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Alexander held her close. His hand splayed protectively over her still flat stomach where their child grew. I can't believe I almost threw this away, he said quietly. I almost convinced myself I didn't need you. You're a stubborn man, Beatrice said with a tired smile. It's one of your more challenging qualities. I prefer to be persistent. Stubborn. Persistent. He kissed the top of her head. But you're right. I was a coward. I let fear control me instead of facing it. You faced it tonight. Because you didn't let me hide. You forced me to confront what I was doing. His arm tightened around her. Thank you for that. For not giving up on me. Never, Beatrice promised. I'll never give up on you, Alexander. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, no longer separated by walls of fear and pride. The next morning, Beatrice woke to find Alexander still beside her, watching her with an expression so soft and full of wonder that it made her chest ache. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning, my love." He said the endearment carefully, as if testing how it felt, then smiled. "I like that, being able to call you that. I like it too. How are you feeling? Any nausea?" "A little, but manageable. I'll have cook prepare something gentle for breakfast. And we're sending for Dr. Hendricks today. I want to make absolutely certain you and the baby are healthy." His hand moved to her stomach again, that protective gesture she was beginning to love. "Our baby. God, Beatrice, we're going to be parents. Terrifying, isn't it?" "Absolutely." But he was smiling. "Wonderfully, amazingly terrifying." They spent the morning together, something they'd never done before. Alexander insisted Beatrice rest, but when she protested that she wasn't an invalid, they compromised. She would rest in his study while he worked so they could be together. It was domestic and comfortable and perfect. Dr. Hendricks arrived in the afternoon and confirmed what they already knew. Beatrice was approximately 10 weeks pregnant. All signs indicated a healthy pregnancy, though he cautioned her to rest and avoid undue stress. "Congratulations, your graces," he said warmly. "This is excellent news for the duchy." After he left, the Dowager Marguerite appeared, looking insufferably pleased with herself. "Well," she said to Alexander, "I see you've finally come to your senses. Were you involved in this?" Alexander asked suspiciously. "I merely gave your wife some advice. What she chose to do with it was entirely her decision." "You're a meddling old woman." "I'm a meddling old woman who's about to become a great-grandmother." Marguerite smiled at Beatrice. "Thank you, my dear, for saving my foolish grandson from himself." A few days later, news of the pregnancy spread through the household quickly. The staff was delighted. Messages of congratulation poured in from neighboring estates. But there was one piece of unfinished business. Magistrate Pemberley returned. This time he looked considerably less confident. "Your graces," he said, when Thornton showed him into the drawing room where Beatrice and Alexander sat together. Pointedly together, Alexander's hand holding hers. "I wanted to inform you that the investigation into Mr. Gerald Ashford's death has been concluded." "Indeed," Alexander said coolly. "Yes, it appears Mr. Ashford had been drinking heavily on the night of his death. Several witnesses confirmed he was intoxicated when he went upstairs. The maid who reported seeing a figure near the staircase was questioned further. She now admits she saw Mr. Ashford himself, stumbling in the darkness. There's no evidence of foul play. So my wife is cleared of any suspicion," Alexander said flatly. "There was never any real suspicion, Your Grace. Merely questions that needed to be answered." Pemberley had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I apologize if my inquiries caused distress. I was simply being thorough." "You were looking for a convenient suspect," Alexander said coldly, "and you chose to harass my wife despite having no evidence. I trust this experience has taught you to be more careful about casting aspersions on duchesses." "Yes, Your Grace. Absolutely." Pemberley practically fled from the room. After he left, Beatrice sagged with relief. "It's over. It's over," Alexander confirmed, pulling her into his arms. "Gerald Ashford is dead. The investigation is closed. You're safe." "We're safe," she corrected. "All three of us." Her hand moved to her stomach. "All three of us," he agreed, his hand joining hers. Late October, 7 months later. The labor began in the early hours of a crisp autumn morning. Beatrice woke to cramping pain that was unmistakable. She'd been expecting it for days. The baby was due any time now, but the reality of it still made her breath catch. "Alexander," she whispered, shaking him awake. He was up instantly, alert and terrified in equal measure. "Is it time?" "Yes." The next hours were a blur of activity. Dr. Hendricks was summoned. The midwife arrived. The Dowager Duchess appeared to provide support and manage the chaos, and Alexander refused to leave. "Your Grace, it's not customary for husbands to be present during childbirth," the midwife said disapprovingly. "I don't give a damn about custom," Alexander replied. "I'm staying." So he stayed. He held Beatrice's hand through every contraction. He wiped her brow with cool cloths. He whispered words of encouragement and love even when she was too exhausted to respond. And when their son finally arrived, squalling and perfect, Alexander wept openly. "He's beautiful," he breathed, as the midwife placed the cleaned and wrapped baby in Beatrice's arms. "Beatrice, he's perfect. We made him," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We made a person, Alexander. We did." He leaned down to kiss her forehead, then gazed at their son with wonder. "What shall we name him?" They discussed names for months, unable to agree on anything. But looking at her son now, Beatrice knew. "Thomas," she said, "after your father." Alexander's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Are you certain? Your father was a good man who taught you about responsibility and duty and caring for those under your protection. I want our son to carry on that legacy." "Thomas Alexander Thorne," Alexander said softly. "Viscount Ashby, future Duke of Greystone." Their son yawned, unimpressed by his titles, and both parents laughed. "He has no idea what he's in for," Beatrice said. "We have years to prepare him," Alexander replied, "and to spoil him outrageously first." Over the next weeks, as Beatrice recovered and they adjusted to life with a newborn, Alexander proved to be a devoted father. He refused to hand Thomas over entirely to nurses, insisting on being involved in his son's care in ways that shocked the staff but delighted Beatrice. "You're going to be so exhausted," she said one night, watching Alexander pace their room with a fussing Thomas. "I don't care. I'm not going to be one of those fathers who only sees his children when they're presented in the drawing room for inspection." He looked down at Thomas, his expression soft. "He's my son. I want to know him. You're going to be an excellent father." "I hope so." Alexander continued pacing until Thomas finally settled, then carefully placed him in the cradle beside their bed. "I want to be better than excellent. I want to be present, involved, the kind of father he can come to with anything." "He will be," Beatrice assured him, "because you'll teach him by example." Christmas Eve 2 months later. The first Christmas of Thomas's life was magical. Greystone Abbey was decorated with greenery and candles. A Yule log blazed in the great hall. The tenants had been invited for their annual Christmas feast, a Thorne family tradition going back generations. Beatrice stood in the ballroom, Thomas in her arms, watching Alexander distribute gifts to the tenant children. He'd insisted on being personally involved, learning each child's name, asking about their interests. "Your husband is causing quite a stir," the Dowager Marguerite said, appearing at Beatrice's elbow. "The tenants aren't accustomed to a duke who actually speaks to their children. Alexander believes in doing things differently than his predecessors. A trait he learned from you, I suspect." Marguerite smiled at Thomas, who grabbed at her finger with a determined grip. "This one is going to be trouble. He has his father's stubbornness. And his mother's determination," Beatrice added. "Heaven help us all." Edward and his wife Margaret had come for the holidays, and they found Beatrice and Marguerite just as Alexander finished with the children. "Your husband is showing the rest of us up," Edward said cheerfully. "Now Margaret expects me to learn all our tenants' names." "You should know their names anyway," Margaret said, swatting his arm affectionately. "Your cousin has the right idea." "My cousin has always been insufferably perfect," Edward replied, but his tone was fond. "Though I must say marriage has improved him considerably. He actually smiles now, occasionally even laughs. It's unsettling." "I smile," Alexander protested, joining their group. "You brood with slightly less intensity," Edward corrected. "It's not quite the same thing." Alexander ignored him, reaching for Thomas. "May I?" Beatrice handed their son over, watching as Alexander cradled him with practiced ease. The sight never failed to make her heart squeeze with love. He's gotten heavier, Alexander observed. Growing so fast. That's what babies do, Margaret said. Just wait until he's walking. Then you'll really have your hands full. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Beatrice found a quiet moment to stand at one of the ballroom windows, looking out at the snow-covered grounds of Greystone Abbey. A year ago, she'd been at Thornbury Hall, facing a bleak and terrifying future. Gerald Ashford had been alive and threatening. Winter had been coming, and she'd had nowhere to run. Now she stood in her own home, her home, safe and loved and surrounded by family. It was hard to believe how much had changed. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, coming to stand beside her. Thomas was asleep in his arms, tiny face peaceful. "How different everything is from a year ago," she said. "How impossible all of this would have seemed. Are you happy?" He asked the question as if her answer truly mattered, as if he needed to know. "Deliriously," she assured him. "You, more than I ever thought possible." He shifted Thomas carefully so he could put his free arm around Beatrice. "I spent so many years convinced I didn't need or want this. A real marriage, a family, love. I thought I was protecting myself. And now I realize I was just afraid of living." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for forcing me to face that fear, for refusing to accept the cold, distant marriage I tried to impose, for loving me even when I was too stubborn to love you back." "You weren't too stubborn," Beatrice said. "You were wounded. There's a difference." "My wise Duchess," he said fondly. They stood together in silence, watching the snow fall, their son sleeping between them, and Beatrice thought about how life worked in strange ways. She'd married Alexander out of desperation, seeking safety and security. She'd found so much more: love, partnership, purpose, family. "We should go back," Alexander said eventually, "before Edward starts telling embarrassing stories about me to the tenants." "Too late for that, I'm afraid. I heard him regaling them with the tale of your first parliamentary speech." Alexander groaned. "I was 22 and terrified. I stumbled over every other word." "He said you were earnest and passionate and obviously cared deeply about your responsibilities." "That's a charitable interpretation. It's the truth." She turned to face him fully. "You care, Alexander, about your duties, your tenants, your family. That's not a weakness. It's your greatest strength." He looked at her with such love that it took her breath away. "How did I get so lucky?" "You married a desperate woman who needed safety by winter." "I married the love of my life," he corrected. "I was just too foolish to realize it at first." Spring, 1 year later. Spring had finally arrived at Greystone Abbey. The gardens were in full bloom, narcissus and tulips adding splashes of color to the landscape. The trees were leafing out, and birdsong filled the air. Beatrice walked through the gardens with Thomas toddling beside her, holding her hand and pointing at every flower and butterfly with excited babbling. "Yes, darling," she said, bending to show him a particularly beautiful daffodil. "It's a flower. Very pretty." "Flo," Thomas attempted, then giggled at his own pronunciation. At 14 months, he was into everything, curious and fearless and absolutely exhausting. She looked up to see Alexander riding in from his morning inspection of the estate. He dismounted smoothly and handed the reins to a groom, then strode toward them with that purposeful walk she'd come to know so well. "There are my two favorite people," he said, scooping Thomas up and tossing him gently in the air. Thomas shrieked with delight. "How were the northern fields?" Beatrice asked. "Excellent. The new drainage system is working perfectly. We should have a very good harvest this year." He settled Thomas on his hip. "And how was your morning?" "Busy." Thomas managed to empty 3 entire shelves in the library. I found him sitting in a pile of philosophy texts, chewing on Aristotle. A discerning palate. Alexander kissed her cheek. "I have something to tell you." "Oh, I received a letter from the Crown this morning. They've made a decision about Thornbury Hall." Beatrice tensed. She hadn't thought about Thornbury in months, but the mention of it still stirred uncomfortable memories. "What decision?" They're selling it. Asked if I wanted to purchase it as an investment property. He paused. I declined. You did. I thought about it carefully. Thornbury has revenue-generating potential, and it would round out our northern holdings nicely. But then I realized I didn't want to own the place where you were threatened and afraid. I don't want that darkness attached to our family. His free hand found hers. So I declined and recommended they sell it to the Ashworth family. They have holdings nearby. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. For what? For understanding. For protecting me even from memories. Always, he promised. They walked together through the gardens, Thomas pointing at everything and naming things with his limited but growing vocabulary. I have something to tell you too, Beatrice said. What's that? She smiled up at him. I'm pregnant again. Alexander stopped walking, his eyes going wide. Are you certain? Yes. Dr. Hendricks confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to tell you privately. Joy broke across his face like a sunrise. He pulled her into a careful embrace. Thomas squished between them and protested loudly. Another baby, Alexander breathed. Beatrice, that's wonderful. You're happy. I'm elated. He pulled back to look at her. Though I'm also terrified. One baby nearly did me in. How are we supposed to manage two? Together, she said simply. The way we manage everything. Together, he agreed. That evening, after Thomas was tucked into bed and the house had quieted, Beatrice and Alexander sat in the library. Their library now, a shared space where they spent most evenings together. Alexander was reviewing ledgers. Beatrice was working on correspondence for her charitable foundation, which had grown significantly over the past year. Do you ever think about how this all started? She asked suddenly. He looked up from his papers. All the time. Sometimes I can barely remember being that desperate girl who wrote to a strange duke, begging for protection. Sometimes I can barely remember being that cold, closed-off man who thought a loveless marriage was the only safe option. Alexander set aside his work and moved to sit beside her. We've both changed so much. For the better? Unquestionably for the better. He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. You know what I realized the other day? What? I got everything I needed when I married you. An heir, security for the dukedom, fulfillment of the entailment. He paused. But I got something I never expected, never even knew I wanted. Which is a partner, someone who challenges me and supports me and sees me as more than just a title and responsibilities. Someone who forced me to stop hiding behind duty and actually live. He raised her hand to his lips. I thought I was trading safety for an heir. Instead, I found everything that makes life worth living. Beatrice felt tears slip down her cheeks. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. I'm still learning how to be romantic, he admitted. But I'm trying. You're doing wonderfully. They sat together in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, books surrounding them. The life they'd built together a warm and solid presence. Beatrice, Alexander said eventually, do you remember what you said to me that night when you told me you loved me? When you forced me to face my feelings? Which part? You said that I was choosing to exist rather than live. That I was taking the coward's way out. I remember. You were right. I was a coward. I was so afraid of being hurt that I was willing to go through life without ever really feeling anything. He turned to face her fully. Thank you for not letting me do that. For refusing to accept the cold, emotionless marriage I tried to impose. For loving me even when I was too broken to love you back. You were never too broken, Beatrice said softly. You were just afraid. I was terrified, he corrected. I still am sometimes. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm convinced something will happen to you or Thomas or the new baby. That I'll lose everything that matters. And what do you do when that happens? I remember that fear is part of love. If I'm afraid of losing you, it's because you matter so much. And that's not something to run from. It's something to hold on to. He pulled her closer. You taught me that. As spring deepened into summer, and Beatrice's pregnancy progressed, life at Greystone Abbey settled into a happy rhythm. Thomas grew into a rambunctious toddler who kept everyone on their toes. Alexander proved to be exactly the kind of father he'd wanted to be. Present, involved, patient even when covered in spit-up or mud from Thomas's adventures. The charitable foundation Beatrice had established flourished. They built a school for tenant children, established a medical fund that ensured even the poorest families could afford doctors, created apprenticeship programs that gave young people opportunities beyond their circumstances. "You're changing lives?" Alexander told her one evening as they reviewed the foundation's progress. "Entire families have better futures because of what you've built." "We've built," she corrected. "I couldn't do any of this without your support." "Still, you're remarkable." In November, their daughter arrived, Eleanor Margaret Thorne, named after both their mothers. She was tiny and perfect and had Alexander completely wrapped around her little finger from the moment she opened her eyes. "I'm in trouble," he said, holding her for the first time. "I know absolutely nothing about raising a daughter." "You'll learn," Beatrice assured him, "just like you learned everything else." The Dowager Marguerite, meeting her great-granddaughter, declared Eleanor definitely a Thorne. "Look at that determined little face. She's going to be formidable." "Heaven help us," Edward said, visiting with Margaret and their own growing family. "Two formidable Thorne women. Alexander doesn't stand a chance." "I never stood a chance once I married Beatrice," Alexander replied, but he was smiling. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." Christmas 2 years after the original wedding. The second Christmas at Greystone Abbey was even more magical than the first. Thomas, now 2.5, was old enough to be excited about the decorations and presents. Eleanor, just over a year old, was fascinated by the candles and kept trying to grab them, much to everyone's alarm. The tenant Christmas feast was held as always, and this year Beatrice stood beside Alexander as they welcomed their people. She was the Duchess of Greystone in truth now, not just in title but in confidence and bearing. She'd found her place here, found her purpose, and more importantly, she'd found love. As the evening wound down and they prepared to put the children to bed, Alexander pulled her aside into a quiet alcove. "I want to tell you something," he said. "What's that?" 2 years ago tonight, I was sitting in my study reading your letter, the one where you proposed our arrangement. I remember. I was so certain I had it all figured out. Practical marriage. Clear expectations. No emotional complications." He laughed softly. "I was such a fool." "No, you were protecting yourself. Maybe. But thank God you didn't let me. Thank God you refused to accept the cold, distant marriage I tried to create." His hands cupped her face. "You saved me, Beatrice. From myself. From a half-life. From everything I didn't know I needed saving from." "We saved each other," she said. "I needed safety. You gave me that. But you also gave me so much more. Purpose. Family. Love. A real home. Then we're even." "Hardly." She smiled up at him. "You win. You gave me everything. Including 2 children under 3 who never sleep through the night? Including that." He laughed and kissed her, sweet and lingering. From somewhere in the house, Eleanor's cry echoed. Thomas's voice joined in, protesting that he wasn't tired and shouldn't have to go to bed yet. "Duty calls," Alexander said ruefully. "Together?" Beatrice asked. "Always together." They walked hand in hand toward the nursery, toward their children, toward the beautiful, chaotic, imperfect life they'd built together. The Duke had needed an heir by spring. She had needed safety by winter. But neither of them had expected to find love. And that, Beatrice thought, was the greatest gift of all.